Marcus Williams rushed through the busy airport terminal, his carry-on bag bouncing behind him as he checked his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. Flight 247 to Chicago was boarding in 15 minutes, and he still had to get through security. This business trip could change everything for his small consulting firm. The client meeting tomorrow morning was worth 6 figures, and missing it wasn't an option. The security line moved at a snail's pace. Marcus tapped his foot impatiently, watching other passengers shuffle forward with their shoes in plastic bins. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner. Client confirmed 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Finally, reaching the conveyor belt, Marcus grabbed his belongings and speed-walked toward Gate 12. The departure board showed his flight status as now boarding. Relief washed over him as he spotted the gate just ahead. But then he saw him. An elderly man sat hunched over in a wheelchair near the gate, tears streaming down his weathered face. His thin frame shook with quiet sobs, and a crumpled tissue trembled in his gnarled hands. Airport staff bustled past without a glance, focused on their own tasks. Marcus hesitated. Every logical part of his brain screamed to keep walking. The gate agent was already announcing final boarding for his row. But something about the old man's despair stopped him cold. "Sir, are you all right?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside the wheelchair. The man looked up with cloudy blue eyes. I missed my connection," he whispered. "My granddaughter's wedding is tomorrow in Portland. I've been saving for 2 years to be there." "What happened to your flight?" "The first plane was delayed 3 hours. By the time we landed, the Portland flight had left." The old man's voice cracked. "There's not another one until Monday. The wedding will be over." Marcus glanced at the gate. Half the line had already boarded. His heart pounded as he made a split-second decision that would change both their lives forever. "What's your granddaughter's name?" Marcus asked, pulling out his phone. "Sarah," the old man replied, confused. "Sarah Martinez." "But I don't understand. Give me 5 minutes," Marcus said, his fingers flying across his phone screen. "I might have an idea." The gate agent's voice echoed through the terminal. "Final boarding call for Flight 247 to Chicago. All remaining passengers must board immediately." Marcus ignored the announcement, focused entirely on his phone. He pulled up flight booking websites, credit card apps, and his contacts list simultaneously. The old man watched in bewilderment as this stranger worked frantically on his behalf. "There's a private charter company I've used for business," Marcus explained while typing. "They might have something available." "Oh no, son, I can't afford anything like that," the old man protested. "I spent everything I had on this ticket." "Don't worry about that right now," Marcus replied, though his own bank account balance flashed through his mind. The charter would cost more than he had readily available, but he'd figure that out later. His phone rang. "Hello, this is Marcus Williams. I need an emergency charter from here to Portland, Oregon. Yes, tonight. For 2 passengers. What's the cost?" The number made Marcus wince, but he didn't hesitate. "Book it." The old man grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "Son, you can't do this. You don't even know me. Your name's George, right?" Marcus said, reading the boarding pass that had fallen from the man's lap. "George Morrison from Denver?" George nodded, still stunned. "Well, George, sometimes we meet people for a reason." Marcus completed the booking and turned to help George to his feet. The charter leaves in 2 hours from the private terminal. Behind them, the gate door closed with a final click. Flight 247 pushed back from the gate, taking Marcus's business opportunity with it. George stared at the departing plane, then at Marcus. "You missed your flight because of me." "I made a choice," Marcus replied simply. "Now let's get you to that wedding." As they made their way toward the private terminal, neither man could have imagined that this act of kindness was about to set in motion a series of events that would transform both their lives in ways they never thought possible. The night was just beginning, and the real story was about to unfold. The private terminal buzzed with quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the chaos of the main airport. Marcus helped George navigate through the sleek corridors while juggling phone calls to his business partner and the charter company. "Tom, I'm not going to make the meeting," Marcus said into his phone, watching George settle into a plush waiting area chair. "Something came up?" "No, I can't explain right now." Yes, I know what this means for the company. He hung up and sat beside George, who was fumbling with an old flip phone. I'm trying to call Sarah, George explained, his hands shaking slightly, to tell her I might actually make it. Here, let me help. Marcus gently took the phone and dialed the number George recited from memory. A young woman's voice answered, bright despite the late hour. Grandpa Joe, I was so worried when you didn't call earlier. Sarah, sweetheart. George's voice trembled with emotion. I have something to tell you, and you might not believe it. Marcus listened as George explained the situation, his voice growing stronger with each word. Sarah's excitement was audible even from Marcus's seat. She started crying when George described how a stranger had chartered a plane for him. Put him on the phone, Grandpa, Sarah insisted. I need to thank him. George handed the phone to Marcus. Sarah wants to talk to you. Hello, Sarah. I don't know who you are or why you did this, but you've given my family the greatest gift, Sarah said, her voice thick with tears. Grandpa Joe is the only family I have left. My parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, and he raised me. Having him walk me down the aisle tomorrow, it means everything. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He's a good man. Anyone can see that. What's your name? I need to know who to thank in my wedding speech. Marcus Williams. But you don't need to. Marcus Williams, Sarah repeated. I'll never forget that name. After the call ended, George wiped his eyes with a fresh tissue. She's all I have left in this world, he said quietly. Her grandmother passed last year, and Sarah's been planning this wedding mostly alone. She insisted on flying me out, even though I know she couldn't really afford it. Tell me about her, Marcus said, settling back in his chair as they waited for their flight. George's face lit up. She's a kindergarten teacher in Portland. Smart as a whip, kind as her grandmother was. She met her fiancé, David, at a literacy program for underprivileged kids. They've been together 4 years now. As George talked, Marcus found himself genuinely invested in this family story. He learned that George was a retired factory worker who had been saving his Social Security checks for 2 years to afford the wedding trip. Sarah had wanted to pay for his flight, but George insisted on contributing what he could. She's been working 2 jobs to pay for the wedding, George continued. Teaching during the day and waitressing at night. David's a good boy, but he's just starting his career as a social worker. They don't have much money, but they have more love than most folks I know. Their charter flight was called, and Marcus helped George onto the small aircraft. As they settled into the leather seats, George turned to him with curious eyes. Now tell me about you, son. What was so important in Chicago? Marcus hesitated, then found himself opening up to this stranger who no longer felt like a stranger. He explained about his struggling consulting firm, the make-or-break client meeting, and how this trip was supposed to save his business. My partner Tom and I started the company 3 years ago, Marcus said, staring out the small window as they lifted off. We've been barely keeping our heads above water. This Chicago client represented everything we'd been working toward. What kind of consulting do you do? Business efficiency and process improvement. We help small companies streamline their operations to save money and increase productivity. Marcus laughed ruefully. Ironic, considering I just made the most financially irresponsible decision of my life. George studied Marcus's face in the dim cabin light. You know, in my 78 years, I've learned that the things that seem like mistakes in the moment often turn out to be the most important decisions we ever make. Even if it costs me my business. Especially then, George said firmly, success isn't just about money, son. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and like what you see. As the plane cut through the night sky toward Portland, Marcus found himself reflecting on George's words. He thought about his business, his choices, and what really mattered in life. Somewhere over the mountains, he began to wonder if missing that flight might be the best thing that had ever happened to him. What neither of them knew was that Sarah had been making phone calls of her own, and their arrival in Portland was going to surprise them both in ways they couldn't imagine. The Portland airport was nearly empty when their charter plane touched down at 1:30 a.m. Marcus and George made their way through the quiet terminal, both exhausted but strangely energized by the night's events. George clutched a small duffel bag that contained his only good suit and a photo of Sarah's grandmother. There should be a taxi waiting, Marcus said, checking his phone for the ride he'd arranged during the flight. But as they emerged from the terminal, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. A young woman with George's same bright blue eyes stood beside a car, holding a handmade sign that read Grandpa Joe and Marcus. She wasn't alone. A tall man with kind eyes stood beside her, along with an older couple and several other people Marcus didn't recognize. "Sarah!" George cried, his voice echoing in the empty pickup area. Sarah ran toward them, her wedding dress bag draped over one arm. She threw her free arm around George, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't wait until tomorrow to see you," she said. "I had to come tonight." She turned to Marcus, studying his face as if memorizing it. Without hesitation, she hugged him too. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing him home to me." "Sarah, sweetie, you should be sleeping," George said, though his joy at seeing her was obvious. "Tomorrow's your big day." "I was too excited to sleep anyway." She turned to the group behind her. "David, come meet the man who made tomorrow possible." David stepped forward and firmly shook Marcus's hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "Sarah's been talking about having her grandfather walk her down the aisle since we got engaged. When she called tonight crying, I thought something terrible had happened. Then, she told me what you did." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the warmth of these strangers who were treating him like family. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," said the older woman, stepping forward. "Not everyone would have. I'm Margaret Chun, Sarah's principal at school. She called me tonight because she had to tell someone about this miracle." The older man beside her nodded. "I'm Father Rodriguez from Sarah's church. When I heard what happened, I had to come see for myself. In 30 years of ministry, I've rarely seen such selfless kindness from a complete stranger." Marcus felt uncomfortable with all the attention. "I really just helped with a flight. It's not that big a deal." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Marcus, you have no idea what you've done, do you? Grandpa Joe isn't just walking me down the aisle tomorrow. You've given our whole family something we thought we'd lost." As they drove through the quiet Portland streets toward George's hotel, Sarah explained how the evening had unfolded from her end. After their phone call, she couldn't contain her excitement and started making calls to share the news. Word spread quickly through her small community of friends, family, and coworkers. "Everyone wanted to meet you," Sarah said from the front passenger seat. "Mrs. Chun and Father Rodriguez insisted on coming to the airport. Half my wedding party wanted to come too, but I convinced them to wait until tomorrow." George leaned over to Marcus. "I told you she was special." At the hotel, as Marcus prepared to say goodnight and find his own accommodation, Sarah stopped him. "Where are you staying?" "I'll find something nearby. Don't worry about me." "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly. "David's cousin canceled last minute, so we have an extra room at the wedding hotel. You're staying with us." "Sarah, I can't impose any more than I already have." "Marcus," George said gently, "you're not imposing. You're family now." The next morning brought a flurry of wedding preparations. Marcus woke up in his complimentary hotel room to find a garment bag hanging on his door with a note from Sarah, "For our honorary family member. See you at the church." Inside was a perfectly fitted suit with a boutonniere and another note. "David's cousin is exactly your size. Everything happens for a reason. Thank you for being part of our story." At the church, Marcus sat in the back, not wanting to intrude on the intimate ceremony. But Sarah spotted him immediately and had the ushers move him to the front row, next to Mrs. Chun and Father Rodriguez. When the music started and George appeared at the back of the church with Sarah on his arm, there wasn't a dry eye in the small congregation. George stood tall and proud, his aged face glowing with joy as he walked his granddaughter toward her future. During the ceremony, Father Rodriguez spoke about unexpected angels and how sometimes God sends help in the most surprising ways. Marcus felt every eye in the church turn toward him, and his face burned with embarrassment and something else he couldn't quite name. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the church courtyard, Marcus was approached by a distinguished man in an expensive suit. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Williams?" the man asked. Yes, that's me. I'm Richard Palmer, David's uncle. I heard about what you did last night. The man extended his business card. I run a consulting firm here in Portland, and I've been looking for someone with your particular expertise. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership? Marcus stared at the card, reading Palmer and Associates Business Solutions in elegant script. I'm not sure I understand. I've been following your work in Denver. Your reputation precedes you, even here. But what you did for George tells me more about your character than any resume could. Richard smiled. Sometimes the best business opportunities come from the most unexpected places. As the wedding celebration continued around him, Marcus realized that George had been right the night before. What seemed like a costly mistake was turning into something he never could have planned. But the real surprises were just beginning. The wedding reception took place in a charming community center decorated with fairy lights and handmade centerpieces. Marcus found himself seated at the family table, still amazed at how quickly he'd been adopted into this celebration. Sarah and David glowed with happiness as they moved between tables, greeting their guests. Richard Palmer slid into the chair beside Marcus during the salad course. I hope you don't mind me joining you. I wanted to continue our conversation from earlier. Of course, Marcus replied, though he was still processing the unexpected job offer. I have to admit, I'm curious how you know about my work. Richard smiled. The business community isn't as large as you might think, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Your efficiency improvements for that manufacturing company in Boulder made waves in our industry circles. We've been watching your firm's progress. Even though we're struggling, especially because you're struggling, Richard said seriously. Anyone can succeed when everything goes perfectly. Character shows when things get tough. What you did for George last night, that tells me everything I need to know about who you are. As they talked, Marcus learned that Palmer and Associates was exactly the kind of firm he dreamed of building. They specialized in helping small businesses and nonprofits maximize their impact while minimizing costs. Richard had been looking for a partner to expand into the Colorado market. The timing is remarkable, Richard continued. I was actually planning a trip to Denver next month to scout potential partners. The universe seems to have brought you to me instead. During the father-daughter dance, Marcus watched George beam with pride as he slowly waltzed with Sarah. The old man moved carefully, but his joy was unmistakable. Several guests wiped away tears as they watched the touching moment. After the dance, George made his way to Marcus's table. How are you holding up, son? This has been quite a whirlwind for you. It's been incredible, Marcus said honestly. I keep thinking I should wake up soon. George chuckled. Life has a funny way of working out when you follow your heart instead of your head. Sarah approached with a microphone for the speeches. Before we hear from the best man, I have something special I need to say. She looked directly at Marcus as she spoke. 24 hours ago, my grandfather was stranded in an airport, missing the most important day of our family's life. Then, a stranger named Marcus Williams decided that helping someone he'd never met was more important than his own plans. The room fell silent as Sarah continued, her voice strong and clear. Marcus missed a crucial business meeting to charter a plane for my grandfather. He risked his own future to make sure a stranger could keep a promise to his granddaughter. Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Marcus felt his face flush as all eyes turned toward him. I asked around today, and I learned that Marcus's consulting firm has been struggling. The meeting he missed could have saved his business. But he chose kindness over profit, love over logic. Sarah's voice broke slightly. That's the kind of world I want to live in. That's the kind of man I hope my future children will become. The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering for Marcus, who sat frozen in his chair. George patted his shoulder proudly. There's more, Sarah continued when the applause died down. Mr. Palmer, would you stand up, please? Richard rose, smiling broadly. Mr. Palmer owns the largest business consulting firm in Portland. This afternoon, he offered Marcus a partnership that could change his life. Sarah beamed at Marcus. Sometimes when you give up everything for someone else, the universe gives you back more than you ever imagined. The celebration continued late into the night. Marcus found himself surrounded by new friends, sharing stories, and contact information. Mrs. Chun told him about her school's need for efficiency consulting. Father Rodriguez mentioned his church's struggling community outreach program. David's social worker colleagues peppered him with questions about helping nonprofits operate more effectively. By the time the reception ended, Marcus had collected more potential business cards than he'd generated in months of cold calling. As guests began to leave, George pulled Marcus aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an old, worn leather wallet and extracted a faded photograph. "This is Sarah's grandmother, Helen," George said, handing Marcus the picture. "She passed away last year, but she would have loved you. She always said that the measure of a person isn't what they accomplish when everyone's watching, but what they do when no one will ever know." Marcus studied the photo of a kind-faced woman with Sarah's same bright smile. "She looks like she was wonderful. She was the best person I ever knew," George said softly. "And she would have told you the same thing I'm about to tell you. What you did yesterday wasn't just about helping me catch a flight. You reminded everyone here that there are still good people in the world willing to sacrifice for strangers." George pressed the photo into Marcus's hand. "Keep this. Helen would want you to have it. And remember that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems like it costs everything." As Marcus prepared to leave for his hotel, Richard Palmer approached one more time. "I know this has been overwhelming, but I want you to know my offer is genuine. Take some time to think about it. When you're ready, call me. What about my partner Tom in Denver? I can't just abandon him." Richard smiled. "Who says anything about abandoning him? Portland and Denver aren't that far apart. Maybe this could be an expansion rather than a replacement." Walking back to his hotel room through the quiet Portland streets, Marcus reflected on the incredible turn his life had taken in less than 24 hours. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Saw your missed calls. Hope everything's okay." The Chicago client rescheduled for next week anyway. Apparently, their CEO had a family emergency. "Call me when you get a chance." Marcus stared at the message in disbelief. The meeting he'd sacrificed everything to avoid missing had been postponed anyway. He thought about George's words about the universe working in mysterious ways. As he reached his hotel, Marcus realized that his story was far from over. The real test would come when he returned to Denver and had to decide what to do with the opportunities that had fallen into his lap. But for the first time in years, he felt genuinely excited about the future. What he couldn't have predicted was the phone call waiting for him in his room, and the news that would make everything even more extraordinary. Marcus entered his hotel room to find the message light blinking on his bedside phone. Exhausted but curious, he dialed the voicemail service and listened to a message that made him sit down hard on the edge of the bed. "Mr. Williams, this is Jennifer Santos from Channel 8 News in Portland. We heard about your incredible act of kindness at the airport and would love to do a story about it. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." Before he could fully process the first message, his cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a Denver number he didn't recognize. "Hello, Marcus Williams?" "Yes, this is Marcus. My name is Patricia Hendricks. I'm a CEO of Mountain View Manufacturing, the company you helped last year with efficiency improvements." Marcus remembered the project well. It had been one of his firm's few major successes. "I'm calling because I just saw the most remarkable video on social media." "I'm sorry, what video?" "Someone at the wedding today posted a video of the bride's speech about you. It's been shared thousands of times in the last few hours." "Marcus, I had no idea you were the same person who helped that elderly gentleman. But after seeing how you conduct yourself personally, I have a proposition for you." Marcus listened in amazement as Patricia explained that Mountain View Manufacturing was expanding and needed a consulting partner for their new operations across Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. The contract she described was larger than anything his firm had ever handled. "We were planning to hire one of the big consulting companies from Denver," Patricia continued, "but after seeing your character in action, we want to work with you instead. Sometimes business is about more than just credentials and profit margins." After hanging up, Marcus stared at his phone in disbelief. His hotel room felt like it was spinning. In the span of 2 days, he'd gone from potentially losing his business to having more opportunities than he knew how to handle. His phone rang again. This time it was Tom, his business partner. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? My phone's been ringing all evening with people asking about our firm. And there's some video going viral with your name in it." Marcus laughed, surprising himself. "Tom, sit down. You're not going to believe what happened." He told Tom the entire story, from missing the flight to the wedding to the unexpected job offers. Tom listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking Marcus to repeat parts he found too incredible to believe. "So let me get this straight," Tom said finally. "You spent our emergency fund on a charter flight for a stranger, missed the most important meeting of our careers, and somehow ended up with enough work to keep us busy for the next 5 years. That's about the size of it. And the Chicago client rescheduled anyway." "Apparently so." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he started laughing. "You know what? I've been your partner for 3 years, and this is the most perfectly you thing that's ever happened. Of course, helping a stranger would somehow save our business." Over the next few days, Marcus's story continued to spread. The local news story aired, then was picked up by national outlets. Social media exploded with shares and comments from people inspired by his selfless act. Marriage proposal videos used his story as examples of real love and kindness. Motivational speakers began including his experience in their presentations. But the most meaningful response came in smaller, quieter ways. People began sharing their own stories of helping strangers. Schools started discussing his example in character education classes. The hashtag #VayMarcus began trending, encouraging others to put kindness before convenience. George called him every few days, marveling at how their chance meeting had touched so many lives. "You know, Helen always said that kindness creates ripples," he told Marcus during one call. "She would have been amazed to see how far your ripples have spread." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the lobby of Palmer and Williams Consulting, the new Portland branch of his expanded firm. Tom had agreed to maintain operations in Denver while Marcus split his time between both cities. The Mountain View manufacturing contract had provided the financial stability they'd always dreamed of, and Richard Palmer's partnership had opened doors throughout the Pacific Northwest. Sarah and David stopped by during their honeymoon return trip, bringing professional photos from their wedding. In one picture, Marcus stood beside George during the father-daughter dance, both men beaming with joy. "I still can't believe how everything worked out," Sarah said as they looked at the photos. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you just walked past Grandpa Joe that night." "I think about that too," Marcus admitted. "But I've learned something important. When you make decisions based on who you want to be rather than what you want to have, everything else tends to fall into place." George had moved to Portland to be closer to Sarah and David. At 78, he'd become an unofficial grandfather figure to Marcus as well, offering wisdom and perspective whenever business decisions became overwhelming. "You know what the best part of this whole story is?" George asked one afternoon as they walked through Portland's downtown together. "What's that?" "It's not really about missing a flight or starting a business or even about my granddaughter's wedding," George said thoughtfully. "It's about remembering that we're all connected. Your kindness didn't just help me. It reminded everyone who heard the story that good people still exist." Marcus thought about George's words as he prepared for another business trip. This time, he was traveling to speak at a conference about ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on him that missing one flight had led to a career traveling around the country, sharing his story. At the airport, he noticed an elderly woman struggling with her luggage, looking confused at the departure board. Other travelers hurried past, focused on their own journeys and destinations. Marcus checked his watch. His flight was boarding soon, and this was another important meeting. But as he watched the woman's frustrated attempts to read the small print on her boarding pass, he smiled and walked toward her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you find your gate?" Some lessons Marcus had learned were worth repeating. And some stories never really end. They just inspire new chapters in other people's lives. The woman looked up at him with grateful eyes, and Marcus knew that somewhere in the universe, George and Helen were smiling. The ripples of kindness continued to spread, one act of compassion at a time, proving that sometimes the most important destination isn't the one on your boarding pass, but the one that leads you to become the person you were meant to be.